Okay, so here we go. I'm so glad to have you all here. This is Just Ask Julia, and today we are going to talk about successful interviewing. So let's get started. So today we're going to talk about 5 questions that we're going to review that have been kind of like the top questions that people ask us about, that people stress over, and they're also questions that we know they're coming. So we want to help you get prepared for them and think of some of the best ways that you can answer these questions. So here is the list, and I want to start out though, before we go into talking about the actual questions themselves, I want to set a few ground rules. So there are some rules to interviewing that not everybody is aware of, and I want to kind of walk through these quickly so that you have an idea of some of the little benchmark things that you should be paying attention to. We're going to start out with the number 1 rule in interviewing, and that is to be honest. Don't make stuff up. Don't embellish. Don't lie. Just always be honest. Sometimes people overlook the fact that being honest about even those uncomfortable questions can be some of the best ways to showcase you and your ethics and your values and how you would show up as an employee. So being honest is number 1. Number 2, which a lot of people aren't aware of, is to keep your answers short. And that's the hard part. That's why you need to prepare and practice the questions that you might get asked and how you want to answer them, because it's really easy to go down a rabbit hole and talk for a long, long time. And if you've got a 30-minute interview with somebody, you don't want to take up 4 or 5 minutes with the answer to a question, because you've taken up kind of like too much time. So you want to be aware of those things that you want to put out to the interviewer, the things that you want to make sure that you capture in those conversations, and be mindful of your time. And believe it or not, 1 to 2 minutes is actually, there's a lot of time in there. I often, when I'm interview coaching, I will time people to see how long it took them to give an answer. And they're often surprised that they were able to get through their answer sometimes in 45 seconds or a minute, 10 seconds. And they didn't realize that they actually had a pretty good amount of time. The other thing I would say, just kind of going down this list, and obviously you can read it so I don't have to go through each one specifically, but giving real and specific examples. So when you get asked questions like, tell me about a time when you've done something, you need to actually say, oh yes, when I was at such and such company and I was in this team working on this project. And you have to give them specifics, not that generalization. Even when you get asked some questions that may seem general, when you can back that up with a real situation, you're in a better position to be clear and concise and have your story validated, because you're giving something real. But then also thinking about when you are in that chair and you're interviewing, try to think of it almost like, okay, this person's already my boss or my coworker or somebody else that I'd be working with. How can I talk a little bit more like we're already on the team? Because when you think of it that way, you stop performing, which is what a lot of people do when they interview, is they try to kind of perform. And what you really want to do is start having these great conversations. So make sure that you are honest, you're taking responsibility for anything that you did or didn't do. Just know that when you are in an interview, very often the front-loaded questions that you get in the first meeting or so are often optimistic questions that are asking about things that you have been a part of and that you've done. Oftentimes, as you go down the interview process, you start getting into those, what I call the disaster questions, where everybody tries to figure out what went wrong in your career and how did you handle it. There's times when things just don't go right. And if you have practiced talking about the project that went completely awry, or the time when you were working on something and you weren't going to hit that deadline, or something else that just didn't evolve the way you expected it to, sometimes those are the best questions to actually talk about, because they showcase how you solved problems, how you communicated, how you worked with people. So don't be scared of them, and certainly be open to talking about things that just didn't quite go right. But in that, make sure that you're gracious, you're giving credit to colleagues, but you're not being critical of people. and you are just being your authentic self when you show up. So practice the answers to the questions that you think you might get asked. I think that you can usually find that right in the job description. If you look at the job description line by line, sort of word for word, you can take everything that, you know, comes in between the commas and say, oh, they're going to ask me, when did I do this? And when did I do that? And when did I do this other thing? And if you are thinking about the stories that you have that you can talk about when you've worked on that, or how you would say, you know what, I haven't worked on that, but I've worked on this other thing that's very, very similar. So let me tell you about that instead. That would be a way to maybe shift that answer to the question where there's something that you actually haven't done before. But when you go into the interview, make sure that you've got questions set up for the people that you are going to be meeting with. When you do this, it helps you to show relatability to the person that you're talking to show that you know what their role is in your hiring, and it makes them feel seen when you have questions specifically for each person. So make sure you've got that. And the number one rule, after being honest, so I guess it's the tied for first place of interviewing, is to let each person that you talk to know that you are interested in the job. All right, so that is the ground rules for interviewing. Let's walk into the first answer that we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about, tell me about yourself. What is this question about? This question is really your opportunity to connect with the person that you're talking to, as well as walk through what makes you a great candidate for the job. So some of the questions that I would ask when I'm interview coaching is, when we're thinking about tell me about yourself, what is your why? Now, where does that question of why come from, or where is it kind of known for today? Many of you have probably heard of Simon Sinek. I think he's a really interesting, dynamic thought leader. He has a podcast, he's got YouTube videos, he's got books, he's got a whole program around what's your why. And not only should you know about like your why, but you should know about a company's why. But like, why do you do what you do? How did you get into it? What makes you love coming to work every day? Those are the things you want to ask yourself as you're crafting your answer to tell me about yourself. How are you going to convey to them what's going to make you a great candidate for the job? What do you do exceptionally well? What do others say about you that can help validate what makes you, great for this job? So when you're saying, when they're asking, tell me about yourself, and you're saying things like, for the last 15 years, I have spent my career doing these things, and what got me into it was this. And it's interesting because I didn't expect that, because maybe you started somewhere else. And then you talk about how you got into what you're doing and what really drives you in that. And where that shows up for me at work is when I'm working on projects where I'm doing these things, or I'm focusing in these areas. That's where I really get into fixing that problem, or working with that customer, or planning for that project. So give them those types of details. And if you know what the mission and the values are of the company, weave that in a little bit so they understand that you understand them as a company, but you also understand that those are the things that you would want to be upholding in everything that you do. But one of the things that is great about this question is it allows you to show your personality and your enthusiasm. This should be a question where you light up. This shouldn't be a question where you worry about what you're going to say, because it's one of the first questions that you're going to get asked most likely, and you're probably going to get asked it multiple times from multiple people. And when you get asked this question, this is kind of like a softball question to say, hey, let me see what you're all about and why you would be great for this job. And you should be lighting up saying, oh, this is why I'm here. This is what I really want to do. So make this a question that you're not worried about, but one that you get excited for, because it gives you the opportunity to light up and shine. So what sets you apart from other candidates? Very typical question. One of the things I want you to know, what is it about, is that this is not about the other candidates. You don't have to talk about the other candidates because you're not going to know who they are. What you need to do is focus on you. What do you do exceptionally well? If you're looking at that job description and you know what's going to be required of this position, what you want to be able to pinpoint are those things in that job that are going to set you apart from other people because you are such an expert, or you have so much information and experience in a certain arena that you're going to be able to do that job with more credibility. Maybe it's easier for you. You can do it faster. So you want to be able to answer what's going to help you stand out in that position. And so you have to give examples. You might say, what sets me apart from other candidates is that I'm going to be able to jump right into doing this and this and this because I've done that before. Let me tell you about, and then you launch into a story about something that you've done in the past that validates why you're going to be a great candidate to do that function of the job. And you can share your insights, your lessons learned, other things about what you are like. You could even say something like, other people will tell you, when you call my references, they will tell you that this is what I bring to the table. This is what I do. So you want to be able to show that enthusiasm and get them kind of excited about you when you get this question. Next question, why did you leave a company? Now, a lot of people prepare for why did they leave their most recent company, but you could get asked this question for any of the jobs that you've had in the past. So you want to have that answer for every position that's on your resume. And what are they really looking for? They're actually looking to see if there's a story that they need to know about, and they're looking to see if you have kind of put that behind you and you're ready to move forward. I say this from true knowledge and experience. About a year ago, I was on a big panel with about 75 HR professionals around the country. And we had a number of polls that we asked them. And one of these polls asked about, how do you feel about when people tell you about why they left a company? Like, what are you looking for? And they all said, really good people lose their job. Really good people take jobs that are terrible for them and they just feel like they have to leave. We're not concerned about people moving around. We're not really concerned that somebody's in between jobs. What we're concerned about is that there is some story that they have not gotten over, or that there was a real problem that we have to be aware of, or there was, or they're still feeling kind of bruised from that, and they're just not mentally, emotionally kind of ready to start this new job. That's what they're looking for. So when you answer this question, I want this to be one of your shortest answers. I want you to tell them exactly what happened. So if you recently got laid off from a company, I want you to say, you know what, I was at such and such company. They were really struggling financially in certain areas, and so they made some changes, and there was a major riff, and about 120 of us were let go across the organization. And I understand that was a really tough decision for them to make. And it's too bad because I really enjoyed being there. So try to throw in something positive. I really enjoyed this aspect of the job. But that's what brings me here today. And so when I looked at your job description, what got me excited about coming here was that I would be able to get back into doing this and this and this. So it gives you an opportunity to say, this is what happened, share a little bit of, the story or the history behind it. How are you feeling today? And focusing on moving forward, because you don't want this to be, excuse me, something that kind of holds you back. But they're going to be reading your body language, your tone, your facial expression, everything that kind of comes across in those other nonverbal ways when you answer this question. So make sure you have practiced this, because they don't want you to be what I would call kind of like the walking wounded, where you're still feeling bruised for what changed. They want to know that you are ready for the next job. So you need to practice this and make sure that you're comfortable with it. And do this for every past job, because there may be a job that maybe you left 7, 8 years ago and that still kind of stings. You need to find a way to not show that sting when you're in the interview. Let's talk about one of my all-time favorites, which is tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker. I think people get stuck on the word conflict. I think they hear the word conflict and they're like, oh, shoot, I have to be able to tell somebody that I didn't get along with somebody, that somebody didn't like me, or I didn't like them. And that's actually not what the question is about. This question about a conflict with a coworker is about problem solving and communication. I'm going to say that again because it's so important for you to think of this. Almost everything in the interview process comes down to these two things, but particularly this question. This question is not to talk about personality conflicts. This is to talk about problem solving and communication. So you're not always going to agree with the people that you work with. You're not always going to be on the same page. And maybe in truth, you don't really like this person, or they don't like you, or you don't really get along, but that's not really the point. What you want to talk about is a time when you and somebody else just didn't see things eye to eye on how you were going to be handling that situation. What was that problem? What was the disagreement? What was the disconnect between the two of you? And how did you work through that? Who took the initiative to have the conversation? How did you listen? How did you convey your thoughts? How did you communicate with them? And how did you come to some kind of an agreement or a meeting of the minds, or at least a roadmap for how you were going to get through that? So it's so much better when you can use a story of a project that you were working on, or something that was important for your team or across the organization, because that also kind of anchors you in a story of something that was going on in the company, as opposed to anchoring it in a personality thing. This way you can focus on whatever was going on and how you worked through that, and show how you problem solved and show how you communicated and worked with that person to ultimately fix or right size or get back on track, whatever it was that you just didn't see eye to eye on how you were handling. And this may also be one of those questions where you are going to showcase something where you didn't win. And we always worry about that in an interview. What if I'm not, conveying that I was able to influence or I got my way? Well, that's not always what you need to be showing. Maybe what you want to be showing is that you listened and you learned. Maybe this is an opportunity to say, oh, I look back on that now, and it was such an interesting situation, and I learned about this. My biggest takeaway from that situation was this. If I were to do it all over again, I would do these other things. So you can use kind of like a reflection of that situation to convey your story, and also let that person on the, who's asking you the question, how have you moved on? And what did you learn from it? Because that gives them an opportunity to see how you interact with other people. So this is, again, not about a personality conflict. It's about problem solving and communication. Okay, last question. What are 3 words your colleagues use to describe you? I actually really love this question, and I hope that all of you think about this. It's kind of a hard one to come up with. So that's why I wanted to put this on here, was so that you really think about think about words that people use. So you might think of 3 words that are very much the same. You can think of them differently. You can maybe think of words, how do you problem solve? How do you communicate? How do you lead? How do you reach out to people? How do you listen? It can be so many different things, but you want to be focusing on 3 words that kind of describe how you show up, because they are looking for those things that they can anchor. And these are often 3 words that they are going to remember. So make these a good 3 words. You might say, I am committed to doing great work. I am diligent about getting things done on time. And I'm funny. I have a sense of humor. I bring a sense of humor. So, you're committed, diligent, and funny might be those 3 words. But remember, it's only 3 words. So make sure you're anchoring those 3 words, and then you can use a little bit of a description, but don't come up with 5 words. If they're not looking for a sentence, they are looking for 3 individual words. And you can back them up by examples. So you might say, I'm committed to the work that I'm doing. I'm diligent about getting things done on time, and I'm funny, so I bring some levity. Let me give you a quick example of that. And then maybe you can talk about a story of something that happened very recently that would tie these three things together. So give them that kind of an example. But again, this should be another question that gives you the opportunity to light up. Let them see your personality and your energy, and have that really come through in that question. So thank you so much for being here to listen to all of this. We are going to stop the recording now.